Welcome back to Red Cedar Radar. It's been quite a while since I've been in front of my computer in the podcast studio, but it's great to be back. I am joined by Ryan from Spartans Illustrated. He's been on the pod a few times before, but he's mostly behind the keyboard, writing tons of things all the time for Spartans Illustrated. We are going to be previewing Michigan State's football game against Western and kind of just looking at the team as a whole. Looking ahead to the season and seeing kind of preliminary thoughts before MSU kicks off on Friday. How are you, Ryan?
Doing well. I'm a new dad, girl dad, so
Yeah.
been really busy.
Mhm.
Learning all about that life, trying to balance this crazy job with that. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's been
Mhm.
been great, been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's jump right in. Um, let's just talk MSU's season overall. Do you have any games that you're really looking forward to seeing the Spartans in, or just thoughts on the schedule in general?
I mean, I think the first one that jumps out, obviously, Boston College.
Hmm.
It's a game that I feel like a lot of people felt Michigan State should have won last year. A lot of people, even on the team,
Yep.
felt that they gave that one away. In Boston last year in the rain. They were down a bunch of receivers, and
Yeah.
they ended up coming up short. Like Aiden Childs even spoke about that earlier. Uh, saying that he was pretty excited for that one. Also, he's pretty excited for the USC one, which is another cool one.
Hmm.
MSU gets to go out to LA. It's the first time they're playing them since I think the early '90s or late '80s, and
Yeah.
so that'll be a cool one. I think USC will be much improved this year, so that'll be kind of a tough test out there in LA. And Big Ten teams have struggled on the road in the West Coast, so interested to see how that one goes. I mean, obviously the rivalry game with Michigan is big, as always, and we'll see how that one kind of shakes out. Michigan's got five-star Bryce Underwood starting at quarterback, so we'll see how that goes for them. And I think that game will obviously be very lively, a raucous crowd. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some interesting ones. When I look at the schedule, the only like auto loss I really see is Penn State. Like they're loaded this year. I mean, it's hard to say they're gonna win a national championship or something because they've kind of struggled to get over that hump. But their roster is loaded. This is probably their best shot to do that in a while. I have a hard time seeing Michigan State, coming away with a win in that one. But they have had a lot of success against James Franklin in the past, especially in East Lansing. I mean, also got a game at Indiana. Indiana obviously had, a really great season last year, kind of out of nowhere with Coach Kurt Signetti and all the transfers he brought over from James Madison. They got kind of a new look roster, new quarterback this year. So interested to see that one. But yeah, I mean, all games are intriguing to me. I love football. I love watching. So you know, pretty much count me in for any of them to
Yeah. Yeah.
follow, see what happens. Report. I'll be at a few of them in the press box. I'll be watching the
Mhm.
other ones from home. So really just looking forward to getting back into football season.
It's been like suddenly a little chilly the last couple days, and I don't know, it's got me really excited for football. Just the chill in the air, and I work in East Lansing, so driving through campus, everyone's there buzzing. Like it's nice to see East Lansing full again. So I'm very excited for Friday just to kind of get back in. Okay, let's move on to there were some recent updates about captains and injuries. Is that right?
Yeah, Jonathan Smith had a press conference earlier this week, kind of went over that stuff. He also did a radio show, I think, yesterday.
Mhm.
So been a little, been kind of updating with how fall camp progressed. Who's
Yeah.
available and who's not, and what to expect as the season starts.
What do you think about his five choices for captains?
Yeah, well, they are actually team voted.
Oh,
So their teammates, their peers chose these guys. But Smith did say, he did kind of like a poll with the coaches too, and they came up with the same five. So they
nice.
pretty much would have done the same thing. I mean, I think most of them are obvious. Like your quarterback, Eden Childs,
Hmm.
almost certainly going to be one. Jordan Hall, your Mike linebacker, almost certainly going to be one. Always had that leadership tendency, even going back to his high school days. I think he was like the only three-time captain in IMG Academy history, something like that. Quindarius. Then again, he's a seventh-year guy, veteran, I believe the oldest guy on the team. So that makes sense. He got the nod. Matt Golban, the center, he's a newcomer transfer. Obviously he enrolled in January, went through spring ball, and he's already made an impression. When you play center on the offensive line, that makes sense. You're responsible for so many calls, and and getting the offensive line in order and communicating. So that makes sense too, even though he's a newcomer. I think the one that was super surprising to people is probably Sam Edwards, who's kind of a reserve linebacker and special teams ace. But if you've been paying attention, it's not that surprising because, even going back the last couple of years, he's always been somebody who's been brought up as kind of a leader in the locker room, a guy that people gravitate toward. Smith said that he actually got the most votes on the team for captain, more than Childs, more than anybody, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, wow.
So, yeah, I guess he's just, somebody who has a real voice in that locker room, who they look up to, who leads. And I think that's really cool for him. Even if he doesn't play that many defensive snaps this year, he's going to be involved leading. He's
Yeah,
going to make a big impact on special teams. Maybe he'll get a few defensive snaps here and there, but I thought that was really cool.
yeah,
That he got voted one, especially that Smith said he got the most votes. So yeah, it seems like a good group. Childs also spoke yesterday and said he voted for people who didn't even make, a couple of people who didn't even make the captain's
hmm,
group, but because there are so many guys on the team that are looked at as leaders. Smith also said they'll do an honorary captain each week. So in addition to the 5 season long ones,
yeah,
there'll be an extra guy each week who earns a uh, captain post for that particular week, that particular game, which is something he always believes anything's as important. Guys who are working hard, showing up, leading the team deserve that recognition too. And yeah, then it just seems like this team is much more connected than last year's team. There's a lot
yeah,
more leadership, a lot more maturity, a lot more togetherness. The staff's been there longer, been able to work longer together with this
hmm,
particular group through, really since the work went in, really since January, really since last season ended. Um,
yeah.
and a lot of newcomers on the team, obviously through the transfer portal and the freshman class. But it just seems like these guys are really close to each other, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of buy-in, if that makes sense. Maybe more so than last year's team. Based on some comments that Aiden Childs had after last year's Rutgers game, it seems maybe I'm just kind of guessing here, but yeah. So
Yeah.
seems like a lot of leadership on this team. That's something that's really important, obviously.
I feel like so. I went to a media availability very early, one of the very first ones, and I felt like, in addition to Aiden Childs just like looking bigger and looking, like he's matured that way, I felt like he matured in his comments. Um, and based off what some of the coaches were talking about, like they had specific things that they really wanted him to work on in the off season, and they were seeming very happy with how that progress was going, just like very early in the process. So I don't know, he just seems like a more mature guy. And last year he always would take responsibility for things that would happen, like in the post games he would always say like, oh, that's my bad, I shouldn't have done that. But I feel like he's a different guy a little bit. But we can talk about Aiden more when we kind of get more into the offense. But I agree with your points of like maybe this is a more well-rounded group because they had a little bit of time to kind of get the guys that they wanted there, build a little bit of culture, and maybe that speaks to Jonathan Smith a little bit. He's had some time to get comfortable and maybe is building something that will generate wins.
Yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
injuries. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying I agree with you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, injuries. There's a couple things, and then you recently wrote an article that kind of went into our kicker situation, or MSU's kicker situation seems like it's a bit of a mess right now. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, so it seems, obviously kicker was already kind of a question mark going into this year because you lost Jonathan Kim, who,
Hmm.
of course, nailed a bunch of 50 yarders, was a
Yeah.
kicker that you could really rely on. Last year, you know, got a shot in the NFL. Um, he was since cut by the Bears, but still, he was good enough to be recognized and signed by an NFL team.
Hmm.
and he was somebody that you could be confident in if you needed to make a 50-yarder, 55-yarder, a 40-yarder, whatever it was late in the game. And now going into this year, the two main options were Martin Connington and Tarek Ahmed Basic. I hope I'm saying that right, Ahmed Basic. But they both dealt with some injuries throughout fall camp, and that's obviously limited their ability to practice their reps. And that that's not a great thing when you have two very inexperienced kickers who are fighting for the place kicking job. And so MSU also brought in another kicker, Blake Sislow, who I believe spent some time at Davenport, and he was just like a student. From what I was told, he was just kind of like a student at Michigan State that they were aware was on campus. They kind of brought him in for like a tryout, like a walk-on type thing, and brought him into the mix. Like they added him. I guess I don't know if it was for insurance because of those injuries or if those happened later, but obviously that was needed and that was a smart move for them to do. And I don't think he really like saw the field that much at Davenport, which is interesting. But according to Jonathan Smith, like he has had a really good fall camp. He mentioned that they're tracking the field goal kicks, PATs, whatever it might be, and his numbers, like his accuracy, whatever they're tracking, was on par with what Kim was doing in camp last year. So he's been impressed with him. He feels confident if they have to put him in that he can do well, and it sounds like that's a real possibility. It sounds like Connington is still a week or two out at least from returning, so he's definitely not playing Friday. And it seems like Ahmed Basic has a chance to play. It sounds like he maybe started ramping up a little more toward the end of the practice week last week. I'm not exactly sure what he's been able to do so far this week. It sounds like it's possible that he could get in there, but if not, I think you're going to see Sislow. And Smith talked about it too. Like obviously, when you have this question mark at kicker, it might change some of your offensive play calling. In the red zone, close to the red zone. Like on fourth down, if it's fourth and short, you're probably more likely to go for it, than try to kick a long field goal or, maybe even fourth and medium, depending on what the situation is. But it does sound like they have confidence in Sislow if he's able to go. I mean, well, he is able to go if he has to be the one who's in the game. And they're just going to kind of see what happens come Friday night with that. So that's definitely something to watch. And I think, obviously it's easy to kind of discount special teams and the importance of kickers, but a lot of the times those guys are tasked with making game-winning kicks or getting points on the board, and so it's definitely a concern and something that I think a lot of Michigan State fans will be watching closely to see how that shakes out.
I'm thinking back to last year, wasn't it Iowa maybe that we just kept kicking, or Michigan State just kept kicking field goals over and over, and that's what
Yeah,
won us the game. I think it was Iowa.
yeah. Jonathan Kim made a bunch of kicks in that
Mhm.
game the year before, and at Iowa, he like set their stadium record for longest kick. So again, like
Yeah,
losing Kim is a pretty big
yeah.
deal. And when
Hmm.
you have these kind of huge question marks, you have no idea what you actually have at kicker and
Right.
experience and guys dealing with injuries. So
Hmm.
it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Go moving on from that. Another kind of exciting thing. Jack Velling is set to return. It's looking like. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, he was a guy who missed a good portion of fall camp. I don't know what his injury was specifically, but he was wearing a walking boot. I was there the first day for fall camp to watch practice. It was one of the first things I noticed was him standing there. I didn't report on it because Michigan State doesn't really want you to do that. But it was just something in the back of my mind. I was curious, like, oh, I wonder how long he's out for. What's the deal with that? But he has been, since able to return I think last week and this week, and he's expected to be a full goal for Friday, which is big. Obviously, he's a starting tight end. MSU will often use multiple tight ends. Michael Masunas is back. He dealt with injury last year. Brendan Parachak, they added Kai Rios. Jaden Savory's a true freshman who Smith said might even get some time, and Brian Lindgren, have been impressed like through practice and scrimmages with. So it might not be totally shocking to see him out there as a true freshman. But yeah, obviously like Belling's your main tight end. he came in last year with big expectations, kind of underwhelmed a little bit. He had a good amount of receptions, but only one touchdown and, not as many yards as you might like to see him. I think this year he's going to have a lot more success given that Michigan State has so many other weapons around him at wide receiver now in the passing game. I see that opening up a lot of opportunities for him. Plus, he's a senior year. He's been working hard. He was, I think, a little underwhelmed with himself last year. So I expect him to bounce back nicely this year. But yeah, it sounds like he'll be back. Then safety Nakai Martinez, he's another one who's a starter, who's kind of a questionable game time decision. He has missed a good portion of fall camp as well. I think it was just this week he started getting reps, getting ramped up. So I'm unsure if he's going to play. Smith said he's a game time decision. He said the same thing about Ahmed Basic at kicker. And I think if Martinez doesn't play, I think we're going to see a lot of Justin Denson, maybe some Amarion Smith. It's kind of that field safety. And I think we're going to see a lot of rotation with the defensive backs regardless. But those are kind of the main guys I think will replace him. But, if he can play, he showed last year, Martinez, he's a big play guy. He had a couple of interceptions, a lot of tackles. And I think, he came over from Central Florida last year and made immediately grabbed a starting role, made an impact. So, being without him is a loss for sure. But I think they have a lot of depth back there with Denson Smith and some other guys who would be able to fill in nicely, especially against a Western Michigan team who's planning to play two quarterbacks. Actually, one of them is kind of
Maybe
more
a
of an
familiar
athletic.
face.
What's that?
I said maybe a familiar face, right? One transferred from Indiana, is that right?
Yeah, one transfer from Indiana, and he's kind of the more, I guess, athletic. Might be a little a little more adept to running. His name is Brock Lowry. Yeah, he started his career at Indiana, and uh, I think he got some playing time last year. He only threw like 8 passes, but he ran for 133 yards, a couple scores, something like that. So I think if he's in the game, then perhaps they might Western might have a little more play calls with design runs, stuff like that, or he can escape the pocket mobility. The other guy, he's coming in from JUCO ranks, Brady Jones, and he was at Riverside Community College in California. He threw for like a bunch of yards, like I think almost 4,500 and like something ridiculous, like 44 touchdowns last year. But again, it's at the junior college level. How does that translate to the FBS? I don't know. I don't know which one of those guys is going to start, but it sounds like they're both going to play, and so I am curious, like how much they actually do pass the football. With if Martinez is out, are they going to test that? Are they going to want to try to run it more? Like it'll be interesting. So we'll see.
Just talking about all those guys going from different places, landing at Western Michigan, landing at Michigan State, like it's so interesting now with the landscape that college football is, like to talk about how much change there is in a team from year to year. Like it just blows my mind every time. And I imagine you know that even more so because I feel like you're in tune with kind of where guys are going, what guys are thinking, like you talk to more of the coaches, more of the guys, like I bet that is terrible to keep up with. I
Oh
don't envy that.
yeah, it's it's definitely a lot to track in the off season. It's very hard to keep up with. In addition to the Michigan State stuff, like for the winter portal and spring portal, I was actually helping with national
Yeah.
transfer portal stuff for rivals. So that was a ton to keep up with. Super busy. Like just
Yeah.
the movement in college football is insane right now. Another guy that Western brought in from Michigan, running back Cole Cabana, one-time
Yeah.
Michigan State target as a recruit, and he's head coach Lance Taylor said he's going to be unavailable for this game. So that's interesting because I kind of wanted to see him play against Michigan State's defense and just see how he looked and what he could do at Western. Doesn't sound like he'll have a
Right.
long-term injury, so he should be able to still have a productive season. But I'm very curious to see how he does there. Obviously a talented player.
Yeah.
That I think it's a big time get for Western Michigan. I think he was
Yeah.
originally going to transfer to Minnesota and changed his mind, so that'll be
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Any other comments about captains or injuries before we kind of jump in just to like some players to watch?
I think the other injuries to bring up. Long snapper again. You don't
Yes.
know that you need a long snapper until you don't have one. If I think Michigan State fans are very well aware of that the last couple of years.
Hmm.
Caden Schickel, suffered a season-ending injury last year. Been recovering from that. He was really good up until that injury point, and
Yeah.
it's not. He's been really limited on fall camp as well, and it sounds like his status is also kind of uncertain for Friday. And if he can't go, you're sticking a true freshman long snapper in there, and Jack Wills, who Smith said is absolutely ready for the task, but you
Hmm.
never know. But yeah, Wills, he's a really good. Even though he's a true freshman, that the team has a lot of confidence in him. So hopefully things go off, without a hitch, and
Hmm.
that's okay. I think we'll see which one is able to handle the long snapping duty. Sam Edwards, who we talked about earlier, is also has long snapping experience if needed, but it sounds like Wills will be the guy, if needed. And true freshman running back Jace Clarizio sounds like he's been dealing with a calf injury a little bit through fall camp. I'm not entirely sure how much he was going to play as a true freshman anyway. Whether that be special teams at running back, because you got the three veterans ahead of him. Well, when I say veterans, I mean Brandon Tulis and Mekhi Frazier are just sophomores who are going into their first year starting, so they're kind of new too. But then you got Elijah Tolliver, who transferred in from Sacramento State, and I think you might see all three of those guys get some playing time Friday, as MSU still looks to see who's going to lead that running back rotation. So yeah, and then I'm sure there's some other guys who are beat up who will show up on the availability report as out or questionable, but those are kind of the main ones we've been hearing about, we've been tracking.
Okay. Let's jump right in to players to watch. Just kind of give some names. We've talked about a lot of names already. So there's some positions maybe to be watching to see kind of how those things will shake out, like we talked about. But guys that you are excited for on the offense, maybe talk about Child's development a little bit, and then anyone maybe on the offensive line, any other like buzzworthy names that fans should be watching for.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what Childs, like we kind of mentioned it already, but you haven't heard like a ton about him this offseason, because I think that's by design, and I think that's because he's just had his head down working to get better. Like as you mentioned, he's bulked up. He put emphasis on the weight room, strength and conditioning. He's really put an emphasis on the leadership aspect, and that's a big thing for him. I think even going back to that last Rutgers game last year when he came into the press conference, and he was very blunt, like guys who don't want to be here can get out of here, and from this point forward, like I'm going to do whatever it takes to become a better leader, and I think he's really done that. Obviously, got voted the captain again. He was last year too, but this year, he just like you said, he's more calculated with what he says and media availabilities. He just seems more mature. He's focused, and in addition to that, like on the field, I think a really underrated point that maybe not a lot of people are talking about enough is that Michigan State brought in John Boyer to be his quarterbacks coach. Boyer worked with Childs at Oregon State, in 2023. I think in the spring, Childs had a quote, something along the lines of, MSU hiring Boyer is the best thing that ever happened to me. Like he's very close to him. He trusts him. They are, they talk. Well, obviously they spend all their time together. They talk, but because Boyer is able to fine tune those details of his game and mechanics and the mental processing and the reading of the defenses and the footwork and all of those things. Obviously, when you look at Childs last year, like you can see he has all the physical tools. He made some incredible throws, some incredible plays with his feet. If you're just looking like solely at his highlight tape, you would think this guy was incredible. But of course, you had the turnovers, the missed throws, the miscommunications, and things like that. The accuracy issues, like all of that, is something that he obviously has to get better at. That I think Boyer's helping him with a lot. Brian Lindgren, the offensive coordinator, also worked as quarterbacks coach last year. He's still very involved with the quarterbacks room, but with Boyer in, he's able to kind of take that whole look at the offense, spend more time at different position groups. Still, like I said, put a lot of time in with the quarterbacks, but Boyer allows so much more time for Childs to develop and get those details of his game. And I honestly think you're going to see that pay off. Like I really think you're going to see a much improved version of Aiden Childs this year. Is he going to be perfect? No, nobody is. But is he is he going to be much better? Is he going to help this team win games? And I think absolutely. And the offense as a whole, at least on paper, appears to be so much better. He's got so many more weapons to throw to, so much more help on the offense compared to last year. I mean, you look at the wide receivers room. Obviously, you return Nick Marsh, right? Star in the making, breakout freshman year. Yeah, just all around great kid. And he's pretty much going to be Michigan State's number one receiver this year. He's going to get a lot of the defensive attention. But the guy who I've heard probably the most about throughout spring, throughout fall camp, who's just made a huge impact on this team in practice, who they think is going to be really good, is Omari Kelly. Middle Tennessee State transfer, started his career at Auburn. I think he's going to play a lot of reps on the outside, opposite of Marsh. But both of those guys could be moved around in the slot, whatever. He also can make a big difference as a punt returner, possibly even a kick returner. But I think Alante Brown will see more as a kick returner and Kelly more as a punt returner. So when when the defensive attention is on Marsh, I think Kelly's going to make a lot of plays. And then additionally, you brought in three other transfers at wide receiver. Rodney Bullard, he's coming from Division II Valdosta State, but he's also a guy who's made huge impact in the practices, in fall camp in particular. Like when I ask sources who's standing out, who did well in the scrimmage, Bullard's name came up a bunch. He's a guy who's super athletic, who can be moved around to the slot, to the outside. And the other guy who was kind of like the big splash name when MSU picked him up was Krishan McCray. I think he's dealt with a little bit of injuries, so you haven't heard as much buzz for him throughout fall camp. I think he's good to go now, from my understanding. We'll see. But, he's a guy who's also expected to play in the slot. He was super productive at Kent State, which, no offense to Kent State, but has been an abysmal program the last couple of years. And to put up the kind of numbers he did there is a feat just by itself. And I think, he's going to make a lot of plays. And then the other guy they brought in, Evan Boyd, he's coming in from Central Michigan, and East Lansing native. His brother Ethan Boyd was a former Spartan offensive lineman, but Evan, he's a big-bodied guy. Nick Marsh was singing his praises, I think it was Courtney Hawkins or somebody who said, this guy is essentially better, even better than we thought he was. He can do a lot more things, maybe a little more athletic or elusive than they thought, with that big-bodied frame. So they really brought in a bunch of those guys who can help right away. And like I said, you also have Alante Brown coming back as a veteran with Marsh. You got some promising true freshman receivers for the future. That wide receiver room just looks loaded, at least on paper. We'll see what it does, in reality. And then on the offensive line, we have, MSU brought in 4 transfers there too. Connor Moore was the big one, kind of the FCS All-American at Montana State. He's expected to take over at right tackle. I think Ashton Lepo's still in the mix there, but Moore is almost certainly going to start. Then on the interior, we talked about Matt Golban, who's a captain. He's going to start at center. He's really good pickup, really underrated pickup that I don't think a lot of people are talking about enough. He is, I think, going to be. And I liked Tanner Miller coming over from Oregon State last year. He was a little undersized, to play in the Big Ten, but he did his job. But I think you're going to see a big upgrade in play there, from Golden at the center position. And they brought in a couple of guards, like a vintage from Oregon State who played under Smith and Coach M and those guys while there. Caleb Carter for Western Carolina. He's played every position imaginable on the offensive line for some depth. And then obviously you bring back Stanton Vermeil at left tackle, who, had some growing pains obviously last year coming off of an injury, but really did a solid job in my opinion. And he's a guy who all throughout spring camp, fall camp has been, a lot of guys brought up to me as this guy is going to be really freaking good. So then, Christian Phillips and Gavin Brocious are both coming off of major injuries last year, and they're both vying for starting guard positions. And the depth on the offensive line overall is just so much more improved. You got a bunch of guys who were freshmen last year who are now another year into the system who could, break into the mix this year too, like Raheem Johnson, Rustin Young, Andrew Dennis, like those kind of guys. And so it just seems like MSU's depth at the offensive line position is so much more improved. Like these guys are older, better. Like for the offensive line, I think for Michigan State fans, you have to take a wait and see approach because it's been like the play has been so bad in the trenches for so long. It's hard, every year it's optimism and then doesn't go well. But this year just feels different with the amount of depth and the players they have. So I think, that MSU is planning to go 7-8 players deep if needed on the offensive line. A couple guys rotating in off the bench that can help out that they think won't miss a beat when they come into the game. So I think we'll see quite a few players there. And
Hearing the word depth and offensive line together in the same sentence is something that we haven't heard in a while. So
yeah,
that is very
exactly.
exciting. Yeah.
We touched a little bit on tight ends and running backs already. Like I said, I think a variety of names there. Obviously, Belling's going to lead the tight end. Michael Masunas was a guy who really impressed me last year before his injury, especially as ability as a blocker and pass catcher. Interested to see what he can do this year. And then Brendan Parachek, Rio Savory, like those guys I mentioned. We'll see how much playing time they end up getting. And then the running back position is still kind of a mystery with those young guys that we talked about, Tolis and Frazier. But there's a lot of confidence in them. And I think with an improved offensive line, even if, those two or Elijah Oliver, maybe all three of them play. I don't know that any of them are better individually than Nate Carter or Kayron Lynch Adams, but I think with the improved expected improvement in offensive line play, I should say, and with the number of playmakers that, in the passing game now, like it feels like there should be running lanes open and, so I wouldn't be shocked to see, MSU have a more productive running game this year, even if they don't have better individual talent than last year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
seems like as a whole, things are coming together. Spots that were that hurt them last year that maybe didn't get filled or were filled, and then there were some injuries. And there obviously will always be injuries again. But it's seeming like at the beginning of this season, like there's not very many holes in the group. That's something that I've noticed. Like they've done a really good job of like getting guys that they needed to plug kind of some areas that were lacking last season.
Yeah, like I said, I think you still got to take the wait and see approach with the offensive line, but it should be improved. And then running back is probably the biggest question mark on the offense right now. But like I said, I think there's a path for success there. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch right over into defense. Defensive names to know. Do you have any?
Yeah, it seems like there's going to be a lot of guys who get playing time on defense because you have a really deep linebacker group. You have a really deep group in the secondary with the defensive backs. On the defensive line, obviously you're returning Jalen Thompson as that kind of strong side defensive end, the down defensive lineman on the end. and Quindarius Dunnigan, who we mentioned the captain earlier. Like those are your two main defensive ends. Thompson, kind of had a disappointing campaign last year. I think 0 sacks, came close a lot. Statistically, his numbers weren't great, but also, it has to do kind of with the scheme and what he was asked to do too. But he definitely had a lot of missed opportunities. And this year, it seems like, he's really ready to take that next step. The pass rush as a whole, not just Thompson, was really bad last year. Bring it up a lot, but I can't believe it's a stat that the Spartans went 6 straight games last year without a sack at one point. Like, it's just incredibly bad. And I have heard good things about what the front seven has been doing in practice. And still, to me, the biggest question mark on defense, maybe even on the team as a whole for me, is the pass rush. And so I think, are they going to be better at getting the quarterback? So you got Thompson and Dunnigan, and then, that's pretty set there. But the rush in position, the player who stands up on the opposite end and rushes the quarterback, might occasionally drop into coverage, whatever. But, they brought in several new players this year there. And you got David Santiago, who came in from Air Force. You got Analu Lafelle, I hope I'm saying that correct, coming over from Wisconsin, who's a guy who's gotten a lot of praise from position coach Chad Wilt, and some of the guys I've talked to. Some of the sources said that he's really good. Like Wilt said, he's got juice. I wasn't sure how much he was going to play this year, but it sounds like he's been making a big impression at practice. So, I think they're going to go kind of that committee approach. I think Santiago showed a lot of promise at Air Force. I think he's a guy who's going to get a significant amount of reps there. In addition to that, they brought in Isaac Smith from Texas Tech in the spring window. I feel like he's just got kind of that build that you look for at the rush end position, and I'm interested to see what he can do. Like he did have some production there at his last stop, but he also dealt with some injuries. So we'll see what happens there. They also brought on Cam Williams from Georgia State. He's been well traveled through a few schools. And then they returned Tyler Gillison, who missed all of last season with an injury, but I've heard has had a really strong fall camp too. So it sounds like maybe they might go with a committee approach at that rush end position, but I'm curious to see who starts, who gets the majority of the reps, what they're going to do there, because they have options, but a lot of people, like I said, are questioning where is that pass rush coming from? Is it going to be better this year? Is the talent in that room better than it was last year when you had Chris Bogle? So it's definitely something to watch, and I don't know. Like I said, some of those players are going to have to hit. They're going to have to get to the quarterback. It has to be better than last year. But who that's going to be, I don't know. It's hard to pick which one of those guys. Like I said, I think Smith has the physical traits to do it. I think Santiago has shown the promise in production, and Analu has been, the guy who's gotten a lot of praise throughout fall camp. So, or maybe Cam Williams and Gillison. Like I said, Gillison isn't just apparently a guy who people were saying the transfer's got to earn it over him. It sounds like he's really earned a spot too. So I don't know, if that's gone, if he's kept that all throughout fall camp, or if anybody's jumped over him. But it sounds like he was having a good camp. So like I said, we'll see what happens. Defensive tackle, you got a bunch of guys. I'm guessing Alex Van Sumeren and Grady Kelly will be the starters. Those are the two guys you kind of hear the most about. I did hear Ben Roberts has been one of the hardest guys to block at practice, so I expect him to get a good amount of playing time. And it's interesting to see how they will kind of pair these defensive tackles, because Van Sumeren and Kelly could be your best two defensive tackles, but you might want to split them up to have pair them with somebody else. So I just assume those two will start, but we'll see. You also got Ruquan Buckley, whose name has come up a lot. Jalen Satchel. And then Mike Sean Beeler is a guy from last year who got some praise as a true freshman, but didn't really see the field. This year he's older, he could get in there. And then Derek Simmons is a true freshman who has gotten all kinds of praise from the coaches, Jonathan Smith and Joe Rossi, and like it sounds like he can very much be in the realm for playing time as a true freshman, like meaningful snaps. And I'm not so certain they're going to only allow him to play four games in redshirt, because if he's really making that big of an impact, you might need him later in the season, or you know when guys are starting to wear down, when guys are injured. Like, I don't know, we'll see what happens. But yeah, so
I would
they got a lot of options in the interior.
I would be curious to know like what the strategy is now. Like with a guy like that, there's buzz around him. He's a true freshman. Do you want to redshirt him, or by giving a guy like that playing time out on the field right away, do you secure them to stay with your program longer? You know what I mean? I
Yeah, that's
wonder.
always the question.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Lots of names to watch for to see who will be out there and how much they rotate. And that's part of the fun of like football season starting, is not knowing like who's going to get time out there and kind of waiting to
Yeah,
see who hits the field. And that's the part that I love about the beginning of the season. And then once things shake out, like you know who your
yeah,
guys are and you figure it out. But it's kind of exciting to have options. It's nice. Anything else about the
yeah. And I
defense?
think we haven't even. Yeah, like I said, the linebacker group is really, really deep.
Hmm.
I think the one guy we know for sure who's going to be in the field often is Jordan Hall, as that Mike Backer, the green dot, who will
Yeah.
coordinate the defense, communicate the plays. But
Yeah.
I think Wayne Matthews will probably be the starting will backer as well. And then the strong side backer, the Sam, is kind of a question mark. I think Darius Snow is probably most likely to start there. But like I said, this room is so deep that uh, there's so many guys who they're expected to play there. I think, behind Hall at the Mike backer, I think Brady Pretzloff, now in his second year of redshirt freshman, he's going to get a lot of playing time. He's a guy who's been brought up a lot throughout fall camp as making plays. Samaj Bridgman, uh, he's made a ton of plays throughout fall camp, especially like interceptions. I think one of the coaches said he might actually lead the team in interceptions in practice. He's a guy who I know they were super excited about last year. Like, he didn't play a lot last year, but what his potential would be, how much he'll be able to play. And then another guy who's gotten a lot of buzz, who didn't play a ton last year, but Mike this year, is Marcellus Polium. Uh, those guys both transferred in last year. Polian came in from Miami. He did play in all 12 games last year, but he only played 36 snaps on defense. He was mostly a special teams guy. So I think you might see him get more snaps defensively this year. Bridgman actually came over from rival Michigan, and he only played in 3 games last year. But again, he's a guy that they're super excited for. And then this year's transfer, you had Isaiah Moa coming in from BYU. He's another guy who could potentially get a good amount of playing time this year. Could even provide a little bit of juice in the pass rush if they need him. So all those guys like are going to get some playing time. We talked about Sam Edwards a little bit. I don't know how much he's actually going to play on defense, but he's another linebacker. Like, so those guys are all in the mix. I think Joe Rossi, the defensive coordinator, linebackers coach, spoke yesterday and said something along the lines of, this is probably the most amount of linebackers I'm going to play in games, like rotate through. So he's definitely planning to play a lot of guys, rotate and get them a lot of snaps. But then the secondary is kind of the same way. Like, on the outside at cornerback, what I'm hearing is Joshua Eaton's, he's another guy, another transfer who came over from Texas State, but he's also played at he started his career at Oklahoma. He's a guy who's gotten significant buzz this year throughout the spring and throughout fall camp. Like, he's locked in starter number one cornerback, and he has big expectations going in. But outside of him, it's kind of kind of a mystery of who's going to play. What I'm told, what I'm hearing from sources, is Malcolm Bell, another transfer from UConn, is most likely going to be the other outside starting cornerback. But you also returned Chance Rucker, who he got. I believe he was starting last year before he got injured and missed most of the season. He's going to be a player who I expect to get snaps as well. True freshman Aiden West has already made a significant jump from my understanding. I think he's going to play a lot, a decent amount at least, even as a true freshman. Like I think they trust him to be out there. Andrew Brunson, he's a second year guy who I've heard has had a great fall camp. These guys on the outside, there's a good chance. Najee Burke, he's another transfer who I think is also in the mix to play like on that outside corner role. Like he came over and enrolled in January, went through spring ball. He's another guy. He was at Eastern Illinois previously, and he will be in the mix as well there. Like, so you got, it sounds like Nickelback. What I've heard since spring ball is that Ade Willie has really taken a big jump up in his game, and he's kind of locked in that role. I think Jeremiah Hughes has been in the mix there too, but it sounds like Willie's going to get the starting nod at nickel. Like I said, at safety, when Nakai Martinez, who we discussed earlier, is healthy, he's starting as your kind of field safety, and Malik Spencer as your kind of boundary safety. If Martinez can't go, like I said, I think expect a lot from Justin Denson or Marion Smith. Denson's a guy who's gotten a lot of buzz too from coaches, from players. Like he's a guy that they trust to put back there. He was kind of thrust into some playing time last year as a true freshman due to all the injuries they had in the secondary. So he's a guy who I expect to have a big year. I think he's going to make a name for himself this year. Even if he's not starting and rotating in, I think he's going to play a lot. Our Marion Smith, people are familiar with his story, with what happened with his mom, passing away from breast cancer, and him having to take over his siblings as their legal guardian. He's been through a lot, so it's really good to hear that he's really in that playing group as well. But outside of those guys, you got some other transfers to watch out for, like Devin Cromwell and Tracy Revels, and who can come in and play that kind of safety position or nickel. Anthony Pinnis is another guy who comes in from the JUCO ranks, kind of a lighter guy, but he sounds like he's super athletic. I don't know if he might need some extra time before he gets significant playing time, but they really like his talent there. So there's a lot of guys in the secondary who I think are going to play a significant amount. A lot of like I said, a lot of rotation at linebacker and defensive back. So it's hard to say exactly who plays how much and who's starting and whatnot. But it seems like these guys have a lot of strength in numbers this year.
Strength in numbers. Maybe they'll carry that over from basketball season over into football season. I think that gives a great picture of a lot of guys to watch for, and some question marks maybe that we don't know where guys will land or who kind of will take that starting job. So some names to watch for, and maybe make some predictions prior to the game. The last little thing here before I wrap up our episode, because I think this has been a great preview into the season. Any thoughts on Coach Smith heading into this first game on Friday from your perspective?
Yeah, I think he's the guy. I know that he had a very disappointing first season, but I think people need to understand what he had to work with was very limited, and the time he had to work with was very limited. And he is more of a developmental coach, which is a strategy that takes longer. And I know people are impatient during this transfer portal era that we've discussed. Like, you see what Indiana did last year, and you say, why can't Michigan State have that kind of turnaround that quickly? But I think there's a lot more nuance to it than that. Like, people need to understand this stuff takes time. The staff would rather work on retaining guys, developing them, and finding success like they did at Oregon State. Eventually, it took a couple of years there, but they turned a dormant program into a successful one. And I think that you have to show progress this year. If you're Smith, if you're Michigan State, you have to get to a bowl game minimum, 6 wins, 7 wins, to keep that kind of buzz and momentum going. If not, I think people are starting to talk about maybe a hot seat. It'd be really expensive for Michigan State to move on from Smith if they fired him right now. But I don't see that as a concern anyway. I think that you're going to see a good amount of progress this year. I think that he's the guy for the long term future. I still believe that you can find success with his sort of plan, even though they want to be more of a developmental program. Obviously they still go to the transfer portal heavily. Like you're adding 25, 26 new guys from the portal this year, something like that. But you're also, they also were able to retain a lot of their starters, a lot of guys that they wanted to bring back and develop. And, they have a really good coaching staff in place. The assistant coaches are guys who can teach, develop, and do that. It's just really a matter of how quickly can you get this thing turned around, what the patience of the fan base is, what the patience of the athletic department is. But my personal opinion, Jonathan Smith is the guy, is a great coach, love his staff. I think we're going to see some serious progress from them this year, and I think that the tune will be a lot different this year compared to last year, and the talk will be different, and you even see how big of a jump this staff took in recruiting this year compared to the previous cycle. Like they're adapting too. They know what they need. They're figuring out what they have to do to be successful in the Big Ten long term, and you're starting to see a lot of signs of that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's cool. Interested to see, on another note, just on about Friday's game, what Western Michigan does defensively, because they brought a new defensive coordinator in. So kind of schematically, that is a question mark. Versus, they had their head coach and offensive coordinator back from last year. So maybe you can kind of glean some of the stuff from that. We had Chase do a film review about that. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, believe in Coach Smith. Just excited to get back to football season and see how the season shakes out. A lot of the talk, goes away now about how good this team will be, how bad it will be, whatever. Like now the talk goes away. You have to put those results on the field, and it's time to see what happens with that. So overall, expecting bigger season. The season opener has always historically been a little sluggish for Michigan State, no matter who the coach is. So I'm wondering if it'll be another kind of slow first half, and MSU then picks it up in the second half, or if it's like last year, where it was just kind of a slog the whole way through. And we'll see from there. But it's all about development throughout the season and finding that success.
Yeah, I feel like he's much more settled with his coaching staff. This season, he's brought in some pieces that maybe were missing before. So, yeah, I'm optimistic about this season for him as well. It seems like things are more well rounded, and they're going to kind of work in the direction that he wants them to go. We are spoiled as Michigan State fans, or maybe as people that cover Michigan State, to have Tom Izzo as a basketball coach, and he's very developmentally oriented, process oriented, and I feel like Jonathan Smith, like you said, fits that mold too. And I think that model can find success, and in the past, definitely that was the most successful model. I think that once the dust settles with everything that's going on in college athletics, those are the type of programs that will end up having success again. It will just take a little bit more time to kind of get back to that, in my opinion. I don't really know, but I think he's a guy to stick with, and kind of let that process play out a little bit, because I think he can convert. It just takes time to build programs.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you want to say? You will be in the press box for the game on Friday, right?
Yes, that is correct. I think I'll be there with David, Tessa, and Paul. So we'll be well
Mhm.
represented. We'll also have Marvin on the field taking
Yeah, yeah,
photographs. So
yeah,
we'll be ready to go. A lot of content will,
yeah.
coming out there. Spartans Illustrated. Make sure to subscribe.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to kind of some upgrades that they've made to the like sound system and the scoreboards, I think they've made some changes with concessions too, some new offerings. Some like brand names. I think Little Caesars. I think I saw Auntie Anne's pretzels. Like a good mix of new things, which has been maybe lacking for a while at Spartan Stadium. I've kind of thought so. That's exciting, new fan experience stuff, and I think investing in that stuff is important because you want people to come to the games, and I think that stuff matters. So I'll be curious to see how Spartan Stadium looks after they've done a little bit of work. Um, I'll squint my
Yeah,
eyes and look for you up in the press box. So make sure you wave at me, okay?
fair enough.
Okay. Thanks so much for tuning back in to Red Cedar Radar. I'm very happy to be back. I will have a preview episode every week for football season. Have some different guests on, talk kind of upcoming opponents, players to watch on Michigan State's opposing teams. Um, and there may be a few other episodes here or there where we kind of recap how things are going. Paul wants to come on again. Maybe I'll con Ryan into coming on again. Um, and we can have a couple episodes like that. Subscribe to Spartans Illustrated. We are pumping out content like nobody's business. There's always new stuff on the site. Um, and you can find Red Cedar Radar wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining. And Ryan, thanks so much for coming on, taking time out of your busy schedule as a girl dad um, to join me. I really appreciate it. And I think you gave a great rundown. So hopefully that gives fans some names to watch for um, and to talk about after the game.
Yeah, thank you for
Bye.
having me on.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening. Bye.